The evening sun cast a golden glow over the quiet countryside, where life moved at a slower pace. A farmer named Henry, known for his kindness and unassuming demeanor, was finishing up his day's work. His old van, a trusty companion through years of labor, sat parked by the roadside, loaded with freshly picked produce. But just as peace seemed to settle in, the roar of motorcycles shattered the calm. A group of rowdy bikers pulled up, their laughter echoing as they eyed Henry's van. Without a second thought, they began vandalizing it, spraying graffiti and smashing the headlights. Henry stood silently, watching them with an expression the bikers couldn't quite read. What they didn't know was that beneath Henry's quiet exterior lay a man shaped by years of military service. As the leader of the gang sneered, Henry took a step forward. What happened next would leave them speechless. Henry's calm demeanor seemed to unnerve the bikers, though they didn't show it. Their leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped closer, grinning smugly. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue," he mocked as the others laughed and continued their mischief. But Henry didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his worn cap and let out a slow breath. Memories of a different life flickered in his mind. Nights spent under enemy fire, survival tactics drilled into muscle memory, and a deep sense of discipline that never left him. The bikers didn't realize that every detail, their positioning, their movements, even the way they held themselves, was being analyzed. Henry's military training had taught him to assess threats in an instant. The leader of the gang stepped even closer, pointing at Henry. "Say something, old man." Henry's steady gaze locked onto his. The atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation. Henry's gaze didn't waver, but inside he weighed his options. He could see the arrogance in their faces, the kind that came from assuming no one could challenge them. What they didn't realize was that Henry had faced down far worse than a gang of reckless bikers. Still, he knew one wrong move could escalate things in a way he didn't want. He needed to bide his time. Meanwhile, one of the younger bikers hesitated, glancing nervously at Henry. "Maybe we should just leave," he muttered under his breath. But the leader shot him a sharp glare, silencing him instantly. "Not until we're done here," the leader said, his voice dripping with authority. He turned back to Henry, who still hadn't moved. "What's the matter?" "Scared." Henry finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You should leave." "No." The simplicity of his words struck a chord, but the leader laughed. "Or what?" he sneered. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. The leader's mocking laughter echoed across the quiet road, but Henry didn't flinch. He stood firm, his weathered hands resting at his sides, his calm presence now unsettling even the rowdiest of the bikers. The younger one, shifting uneasily, whispered again, "Let's go. Something's not right about this guy." Ignoring him, the leader stepped closer, his sneer fading into something more cautious as he caught the steely glint in Henry's eyes. This wasn't fear. It was something else: confidence, experience. A lifetime of lessons etched into every wrinkle on the farmer's face. Henry took one slow step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. The group fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "You think I'm scared of you?" Henry asked, his voice even and steady. The leader froze, unsure of what to say. Behind them, the rumble of distant engines grew louder. Someone was coming, and the bikers began to glance at each other nervously. Henry tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Last chance," he said quietly. The rumble of engines grew louder, and the bikers turned to see a convoy of vehicles approaching. For a moment, the gang's bravado faltered, unsure if this new arrival was friend or foe. Henry remained still, his calm demeanor giving nothing away, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, Was it recognition? The convoy rolled to a stop a short distance away. Dust settled as men and women in uniform stepped out, their movements sharp and disciplined. They weren't soldiers, but there was no mistaking the air of authority they carried. The lead figure, a tall man with a commanding presence, walked toward Henry, nodding briefly as if acknowledging an old friend. The leader of the bikers glanced nervously between the newcomers and Henry. "Who are they?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its edge. Henry finally spoke, his tone quiet but loaded with meaning. "Let's just say they're people who know what I'm capable of." Henry smiled faintly, his gaze returning to the gang. "I told you, last chance." The silence that followed was deafening, the tension at its breaking point. The leader of the bikers hesitated, his confidence unraveling as he took in the silent, watchful presence of the newcomers. Their disciplined stance, coupled with Henry's unnerving calm, created a sense of unease that even his bravado couldn't cover. The younger biker tugged at his arm, desperate to leave, but the leader shrugged him off, trying to save face. "You're bluffing," he sneered, though his voice lacked conviction. "There's nothing you can do." Henry finally stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the gang leaders. "You think I've been bluffing?" he said, his voice quiet yet commanding. "This is your last chance to walk away before things get out of your control." As if on cue, one of the newcomers held up a phone, its screen displaying a live feed. The bikers froze as they realized it showed footage of their vandalism in real time, evidence already sent to local authorities. The convoy wasn't just here for show. They were part of a community watch network, veterans and locals working together to keep their town safe. The leader's cocky demeanor crumbled. "You called the cops," he stammered. Henry shook his head, his faint smile returning. "Didn't have to. They've been watching you since you rolled in." The sound of sirens in the distance sealed the gang's fate. Panicked, the bikers scrambled to their bikes, but it was too late. The convoy moved to block their escape, and as the police arrived, Henry stepped back, his calm presence still unshaken. As the bikers were led away, Henry turned to the leader of the newcomers. "Thanks for showing up," he said with a nod. The man smiled. "We know you didn't really need us, but we figured it wouldn't hurt to remind everyone you're not alone." Henry glanced at his damaged van, then back at the quiet countryside. "No, I'm not," he said simply, his words carrying more weight than they seemed. As the police loaded the gang into their vehicles, the countryside grew quiet once more. Henry stood by his van, running a hand over the fresh dents and graffiti. He didn't seem angry, just thoughtful. One of the officers approached, offering reassurance that the damage could be claimed on insurance. Henry nodded, his mind elsewhere. The convoy lingered, the veterans chatting casually as if the tension of the evening had never happened. The younger biker, the one who had hesitated, glanced back at Henry before being escorted into the police car. There was something like regret in his eyes, and Henry noticed. Before the convoy departed, the leader of the group clapped Henry on the shoulder. "You've still got it," he said with a grin. Henry smiled faintly. "Some things you never lose." As the vehicles drove off, the quiet returned, but this time it carried a deeper sense of peace. Henry stood for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, before heading back to the fields. His van might be battered, but his resolve, and the strength of the community, remained unshaken.